first time ever.
Hear you loud and clearly.
And it was going place.
That stuff's great.
But the game is not a roguelike.
Boomer shooter.
Bang.
Hello, this is John St. John, and you're listening to KEEP in the Keep, bringing you all the hits from the finest in the world of gaming and entertainment. Now sit back and relax as the drowned god Cthulhu lulls your mind with the tastiest talk in town.
Welcome to another chapter of In the Keep podcast. I'm your very own prophet of the drowned god, the Motherlode. The Keep is a collective of gaming enthusiasts compelled by the drowned god Cthulhu to frag and jib one another into oblivion for all eternity. All right, we are live here with. You want to be called Al? Not
Al is fine.
Okay. Al is fine. I already fucked it up. 5 seconds in, we're already fucked up. So I did some preparation. I've been actually planning on reaching out to you for a while. I finally got the balls to just do it last night, or early this morning, I guess my time. But I work night shift, so fuck it. Actually, celebration. Today is my last day of night shift. I'm sure my fans will be very proud.
Well, cheers.
So my preparation was I got some Icelandic vodka in celebration of Snorri Sturluson, who was one of the great writers of many skaldic things. And
Indeed.
I'm so honored to finally get a chance to talk to you, man. So Skald, can you just give us the elevator pitch on what your game is for the folks who are just tuning in and don't know?
Yeah, Skald is a retro-style computer RPG currently in development. It's inspired by sort of the legacy of RPGs from the early 90s, the kinds of games that I grew up with at least. And it's sort of my love letter to that genre coming back to it. So now it's sort of a heavily pixelated, grim-dark fantasy, horror-esque RPG that's coming to early access this summer.
What's really interesting about just for what I've seen of the game, which is the 1.3.1 beta, I believe is what you sent me.
Yeah.
So it's very right out the gate. It's very beautiful, and it mixes a lot of different kinds of styles of games that we kind of call retro games now. So, I mean, you have sort of the Baldur's Gate thing going on with the, top down 8-bit pixels and all this kind of stuff, but you also have these large portions of the game that play much more like a text adventure, where you're like, okay, you're having a conversation, you make a choice. And these are all parts of what we call an RPG. But what I noticed a lot was that the story is an overarching thing. And that's always true. But I'm going to make comparisons probably to Baldur's Gate because A, I really like that game. And B, people are hyped about Baldur's Gate 3 coming out.
Yeah.
So you do little side missions and such, and they can take a long time, and they sort of require you to go out of your way and do things. So far, at least from what I've played, it does seem like you're very good at keeping the story moving forward, even with the little side things coming up. Was that a decision, a creative decision for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the game looks older than the first Baldur's Gate game. It's definitely inspired graphically by games that were about 5 or 6 years before Baldur's Gate, especially the early Ultima games and the Magic Candle series, Wasteland 1. But a lot of the narrative structure of the game is actually directly inspired by Baldur's Gate 1. So if it reminds you of Baldur's Gate 1, and also the first two Fallout games, that's actually a pretty apt comparison because those were sort of my primary inspiration in the way we have sort of a pretty linear main quest line. It's branching, and there's definitely different ways to sort of move it forward, but there's this thick linear central narrative, and then there's a lot of branching side content off the sides of it that we sort of aim to make narratively interesting. It's not just go into a cave and kill 10 rats, and we're trying to make it a little bit more a little bit more like a tabletop RPG would be in a lot of cases. That's sort of one of the central design pillars. And that was also one of the things that was sort of central to the design of Baldur's Gate. So I think that shines through with both games.
Yeah, the difference being that Baldur's Gate is like a dungeon master who lets you go absolutely fucking nuts, and your guy's a dungeon master who knows how to keep everybody on track. Like that's the beauty of it. And I did, like, I kind of went in cold turkey because I didn't have any like actual experience with the gameplay until like an hour ago or so, and I just kind of took the risk of like, you know what, I just really like this whole idea of this game. Let's just see how it goes. And I gotta say, like, everything I just said is true. Like, I really enjoyed the way that the narrative kind of keeps you going forward. So you mentioned a few different games that are kind of inspirations, but I'm curious, what were the games like when you were a little kid playing these games? What were the ones that really stood out to you and made you say, like, I want to make something like this?
I don't think at the time that I really wanted to. I didn't really get into game development until I was in my mid-20s. So I was sort of a late bloomer, and definitely the biggest inspiration games-wise that made me want to make games was actually tabletop role-playing games. I did play a lot of computer RPGs as well, but I didn't really have any idea that was something that could be. I had no idea how they were made, and I like a lot of other game developers, I didn't start my career by programming the Commodore 64 in the late 80s or anything like that. I sort of got into it after seeing In the Game, the movie, actually, about the guys who made Super Meat Boy. And then it sort of dawned on me that was kind of, it seemed like a fun hobby. So I didn't really, but I did play, all of those games that I mentioned earlier, especially the Magic Candle series was a big hit with me when I was younger, and I really got into RPGs when just about the time when Fallout 1 and 2 and Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, Icewind Dale, those were sort of the I played RPGs earlier than those as well, but those were the games where I really went deep down the rabbit hole because I read English at a high enough level to sort of really be able to experience them properly, not just like for the top level action gameplay of it.
So what were the like tabletop games that you really enjoyed? Is it just D&D, or were there others?
I played a whole bunch of tabletop RPGs growing up, but more than anything, I was always the game master, and I always made my own system, and so I think that was definitely. I've always, as long as I've been playing games, I've sort of been designing games, not just modules for RPGs, but also like the rule systems and things like that. That was always a pretty big deal for me. Probably partially because I grew up way out on the countryside in rural Norway, and there was no internet, there was no way of getting RPG books. You could maybe drive an hour to a bookstore, and they would maybe have one or two. But if you wanted to really play RPGs, you had to make them yourself. And I think that was probably a big inspiration for why I sort of got into making games, and also for a lot of back in the mid-90s, a lot of the game systems, at least, even me as a teen, I think I recognized that they weren't all that good, like mechanically designed. They were pretty crude. So it got to a point where it was sort of it was both more fun and also a lot more rewarding to just make your own game systems and play them. So I think that's probably where it stems from.
I think you're right in that we kind of see a lot of stuff through like rose-tinted glasses in the past. We think of like these kind of classic games, but at the end of the day, if you play them now, they don't really feel as good as maybe we remember them, or maybe even at the time they weren't that great. It's just like all we had.
Yeah, exactly.
And a big kind of motif that I've kind of brought up a lot on the show is that I think what's beautiful about this resurgence that we've really gotten to see lately of kind of retro style games is that we can take the principles of what made those games good in the past, and you can be an indie developer. You could be one guy or a small team and kind of still create something that's truly special because we have far advanced technology and a lot more time to have seen what works and doesn't work in design in general for games.
Yeah.
And you can have like, 8-bit graphics like what you've got, and beautiful like, artwork and everything that is inspired by that era of gaming, but plays very functionally for the modern gamer.
Yeah.
which is another thing I wanted to touch on with Skald, is that like it was super intuitive. At no point in time was I confused about the controls, which is step one. Good job.
I'm super happy to hear. That's a
Yeah.
big sort of design pillar, and sort of the phrase I use is that I'm trying to make a game that is not the way that games were, but the way we kind of remember them through rosy glasses. So, because playing a lot of these games today, it's a horrible experience. It really, really sucks. So that was sort of one of, and the UI is a big part, a big reason for why those games are so hard to get into. So having an intuitive UI and something that doesn't feel like a 90s UI is a big selling point for Skald. And so I'm really glad that you managed to get into it. That's really nice to hear.
The use of space that you have on the player screen in game, right, where the player's off to the side and everything. We tend to, in this day and age, that kind of focus on making the game itself like this giant, make it take up the whole screen and then like hide the UI in the corners and everything. And you seem to have really embraced the style of just like, like let the game be over here on the left and let the, user interface take up a lot of the screen. And it does a couple of things. It makes it more immersive with the characters themselves. Like you get to kind of like, okay, well, you see his face and everything, sort of like Doom. Actually, you can see Doom guy's face the whole time.
Yeah, exactly.
But it also keeps that feeling of nostalgia alive, and that like, okay, well, the game doesn't take up the whole screen. It's not bordered either. It's just you also, how big is the team here? Is it just you, or do you have a couple of people working with you, or what?
So this is a solo thing, and it's only me in the project properly. But Skald is funded through a successful Kickstarter and an Indiegogo campaign. So, and all of that money went to using freelance artists and writers and musicians. So I have a lot of artists doing like the graphical assets for most of the game. I do all of the tiles myself, and all of everything you see sort of on the action screen is me, the 16 by 16 tiles. But all of the proper art is done by people who are much more talented than I am. So there's sort of a core of me and maybe 4, 5, 6 other people who come and go as they please, depending on how much time they have available for me. I don't have money to pay anyone to work full time in the project, so it's basically me asking if they have time to do this picture or this picture. And to begin with, I was a bit apprehensive about doing it that way because there is a lot of variability in the art, not in the quality, but in the art style. There can be, at least. But I think if you look back at a lot of games, especially like Bard's Tale, for instance, where there was a lot of art of the monsters in the game, there was a lot of it was very varied because there were different artists with different styles, and they didn't really have probably very cohesive style guides. And I think it adds a bit of charm to the game. So I've decided more to embrace it. And so I don't mind if people can tell that different artists have been working on the project. I think it just adds to sort of the viewing experience and in the long run, I think.
Yeah, I mean, all of the art is very beautiful, but I could tell that there are slightly different styles applied to like different scenes. So for instance, like some of the characters are a little like, in no way is it like, does it break the immersion, but like a little more like cartoony, or like have a little different drawing style than some other scenes in the game.
Absolutely.
And I don't think that's a problem at all, but as long as you manage to keep the game, immersive, then that's not going to be an issue that people are like, oh God, like this, why is this way? I don't know, man. People are weird, I think so. Maybe.
Yeah, but I think if you when you do art for a game, I think it's the important thing isn't necessarily, for instance, the use of lines or the use of shading. The important thing is sort of what is fundamentally being conveyed with the art, and there is a lot of visual themes that we use as a sort of a red line through the art that you might not notice on the first viewing, but it's definitely there. The way all of the images tend to fade out to black towards the edges, so there are no really hard. There are always it's sort of this impression of the image sort of emerging from the darkness, and this that there is darkness creeping in around the images. There's a lot of symbology and a lot of the landscapes with sort of starry skies and things like that run through all of the artwork. That sort of you might not consciously notice it, but there is a pretty heavy art direction in the game, even though I allow for sort of a big verisimilitude of how the arts themselves are being made. So
Right.
Yeah, if that makes sense.
The only issue that I had with the artwork was that I know this is a video game and a lot of people are going to be like, okay, get on with it. Like more story, more gameplay.
Yeah.
And each one of these photos is like something that you could probably hang in a fucking art gallery, and I would stare at it for 4.5 hours, picking apart every detail. And that's one of the things that I was trying to, because I knew I was kind of on a time frame. Like I figured if you went to bed today, like fuck it, I'll talk to you tomorrow. Because I really wanted to like take a moment and like look at everything, like, and just try to enjoy it and soak it in.
Yeah.
And I did that a lot with the art. Like I would just like sit there and stare at it for a while and then like really
That's
get
so
a picture
cool to
of the whole
hear.
scene.
That's so nice to hear.
I hope that more people do that, because there's just a lot to take in. And I tried to like really go in deep, like with every conversation I had with a townsperson, or, you know, in the refugee camp and everything, like just really like go the extra mile to like get the full conversation. But I'm like, it's kind of a problem I have like with RPGs. I'm a completionist. And so I have to like kind of avoid them a little bit.
Yeah.
Every once in a while I'll just indulge, you know, I'll be like, all right, I'm going to play an RPG. And I know that for the next month, I'm not doing anything else and my life is over and I'm going to be unproductive. Because I do that. Like I really go all the way in. Like I want to know every line, like everything they have to say, and try to pay attention and not rush through it.
Yeah.
So the biggest takeaway, like right up front, is that you have already successfully made a very immersive game that soaked me in.
Thank you so much. That's really, really nice to hear. Honestly, it is.
And with every good compliment must come a nice backhanded insult. So
of course,
you're also doing most of the story writing, and I assume a lot of the text for the game. And I'm sure you've already gotten this feedback with the one thing that was just like, actually the only thing about the game that stood out to me is like a problem is that if you're going to have so much text in your game, it better be perfect. And currently it's not, and I'm sure you'll figure it out.
As you
absolutely brush through the whole thing. But there's a lot of like just little English mistakes that kind of break the immersion a little bit. For instance, you know, you'll just kind of like miss an apostrophe S or like an ED. Of a word,
exactly.
There's that kind of thing. Yeah,
off and off will always be. You know, it's and it's all of those walking into every trap. So we spent, you know, and actually that's sort of one of the big logistical challenges we're looking into, not just me, but like the whole community, is how can we proofread a text corpus this size, because it's a pretty big thing. And even for you would think it's me writing all the text, but honestly, a lot of it's also written by people who are English speaking. But in the software we use to input the text, there isn't any spell checking, and at least not to the level that we sort of get not just typos, but also sort of semantic spell checking that you get in sort of one of these like in the Google Docs. It will say that well, it should be off, not off, something like that. So we don't have that kind of spell checking, and doing it in a game like this it's actually really challenging. So that's something where we're probably going to draw more heavily on the community. We have a pretty awesome community that's really sort of just, they're really anxious, or they really want to help out. And so finding workflows that allows people to contribute directly into sort of into the data of the game, actually going into the data of the game and fixing typos is one of the big things, because it's, typos would happen even if this was made by an English company as well, because it's there's so much text and it's
That was one of the big things I was telling Damian is like, because his game is essentially a fucking book, like Call of Sir Ragnar is. I was like, man, maybe you should be writing the next great novel. I don't know about this game thing. I'm kidding, but same thing, and it's you're going to see that in indie developer project it has nothing to do with the fact that maybe it's not your first language. Like perfectly solid native English speaker is going to make mistakes, and it's just a matter of catching them before they go public. Or like correcting them in the aftermath. But yeah, like whatever. That's the one thing about the game that right now that just stood out to me is like, okay, this has to be cleaned up a bit. And but if that's all people are complaining about, then I don't see the problem.
Yeah. Honestly, I'm pretty. That's not the worst. That's not the worst complaints we could be having. So no, I'm glad to hear. Despite, of course, it's not fun to ship a game with typos in it, but we still have a long time or not a long time, but we still have months to go before we enter early access, and even then, there will be a lot of time to do things like that. And I think people just have to accept the fact that this is a solo developed project that's pretty hugely ambitious in a lot of ways, and. If typos is the worst they have to put up with, then so be it. I think they'll survive, and the typos will get fixed.
I wrote one down that's not actually a typo. It's actually more like a play on words because it's just an illustration of how stupid the English language is. But so the tonics, right? The health tonics.
Yeah.
When you read the text box that describes what they do, they say restores a small amount of health when drunk. And,
when I hear you say it's well, maybe that was the intention.
I thought like, because I found a spirit too, and I was like, okay, so I'd have to do the spirit first and then chase it with the health tonic, or like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do here. But
I think you just designed a much more interesting game mechanic than the one that's actually in the game. So mission accomplished, I guess.
Yeah, you go to the tavern and get hammered first, and then you can heal your characters.
Yeah, that's fantastic. It sounds like a great. That's some interesting design space. No, but yeah, I totally get where you're coming from, and that's exactly the kind of things we have to weed out of the game. And it will be a big job, but I think we'll get there eventually.
What are you drinking on there?
I'm actually drinking a Corona beer. My wife bought one, and that was the only thing we had in the fridge. So you can beat me out if.
No, man. I live right on the border of Mexico, and Corona is very popular here. In fact,
oh really?
Yeah, like my dad loves Corona. It's like the only beer he'll actually drink. He just squeezes. Did you squeeze a lime in it first?
We didn't have lime, so I didn't. But I totally do if I.
All right.
Yeah, it's like drinking lemonade. Gotcha. I guess it's a good thirst drink, and I just came in from a run, so I'm pretty red faced and a little bit thirsty. So Corona was a good pick for today, I think.
It's a refreshing beverage at the end of a nice day.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I guess it's time to turn the conversation for the worse, and let's start talking about the background of this thing. So, why did you name it Skald?
I think there's a lot of different reasons for it, and probably like the first and definitely least sexy reason is that Skald has a lot of. It's not really a word that's been used a lot in game names, so it's sort of unique, and it's also recognizable enough that it can be used as something that identifies games across titles. And sort of the whole idea about the Skald system or engine is that I'm going to reuse it to make several games, at least as long as this one doesn't bomb completely. So there is definitely an element of sort of building a brand and having some brand recognition associated with it. And also because, Skald is basically, it's a Scandinavian storyteller, and that what better name for a Norwegian company that makes role-playing games, I guess. So, but there's also, beyond that, sort of the in-game explanation for it is, I had this discussion the other day with one of my backers, and his sort of read on it was that the Skald is that it refers to sort of the game basically being a retelling of heroic stories, and
Yes.
that's definitely a way to see it. But in my mind, sort of the in-game, the role of the Skald in the Skald universe is basically this idea that the game world that you're experiencing now is basically a society that's not only on the brink of collapse, but sort of it's in a very slow burning collapse of this big Roman Empire-esque social institution, and sort of the idea is that these are in fact tales being told through some oral tradition many years after the fact by Skalds, because there are no books left. They've all been burned. It doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
So that's sort of more of the in-game the in-game explanation, that we're sort of hearing these stories many years after the game takes place, and we're only sort of experiencing, the only way to experience them is through this oral tradition, because society has regressed to a point where words aren't being written down anymore. So there's sort of this bearded wanderer, stumbling into this cottage for the evening up in somewhere in the high north in this post-atomic magic apocalypse, and he pays for his food and lodging by telling stories of how the empire fell. That's sort of the idea around what the Skald would be doing in the Skald universe when we encounter them.
Initially, when I first saw the project, I thought the game was about a Skald. Like, I'm going to be the Skald in the game, that kind of thing. And I'm sure you got a little bit of that. And I was kind of like trying to play around with that in my head. I'm like, so is this a game about telling stories? And I like your explanation of it, because what you're saying is actually what happened basically in real life. I mean, when the Holy Roman Empire kind of started to take over Europe, the only thing we had left of the Germanic pagan, folklore and everything was through the Skalds, and actually through Christians who had long since kind of forgotten about it. In Iceland,
exactly.
One of the reasons why I brought the Icelandic vodka was like Snorri Sturluson decided it was important, even though it wasn't his, I don't know what was going on in his head, but allegedly it wasn't his religion, but they had kept the stories alive through oral storytelling, and he thought it was important to write it down.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. And so now all we really have of those stories is what was passed down orally, in Germany, in that area, and then in Scandinavia and Iceland and the Faroe Islands and everything. So we had, exactly. and the Eddas themselves, which were, if I understand correctly, the Romans just decided, like, well, let's try to record what these people believed before we Christianize them.
Yeah.
And then end up with those documents that we still have, which have been translated a million times. But
yeah, exactly. And it will definitely be possible to play a Skald in the game. But the premise of the game isn't that you are a Skald necessarily. But the Skald will, of course, make an appearance, like a literal appearance in the game. You will, of course, be able to play as a Skald instead of a Bard, for instance. So they will be in the game. They will.
So the characters that I've gotten to see so far, we got a cleric. I chose to be a warrior because I figured if I'm going to make it through the game in an hour, I better just tank it through and kill everything in my sight. Although I would have preferred probably, like, the next time I play it, I'll probably be a rogue, because that's usually what I play in tabletop games.
Yeah.
And then we also have what class is what's his name? I'm sorry,
Roland.
Everybody's names right now. Roland, yes.
Roland what is a warrior as well.
Okay.
Yeah, he's the warrior you get from the start of the game, so you don't have to play a warrior to survive the game.
Well,
unless you want to, of course. You don't have to bring Roland along, but he's a pretty interesting character. So, and it's like I said, he's a big meat shield. So,
Yeah, I immediately just farmed around in the island, and then I kept going back to the merchant and I just bought everybody like the best armor I could find, which I guess is the plated armor at this point.
Yeah, there's no restrictions on items yet in the game. I didn't put in anything. I mean, the mage can wear plate mail if you want to, so it's pretty forgiving in that sense.
I liked that freedom. I thought it was like, this is refreshing. I can just like go ape shit and like buy everybody everything. But yeah, you gotta have some sort of limitation, I guess. You can't have your mage running around in a knight's armor, and you have to invent some reason why magic can't go through steel or whatever.
I don't really have a problem with spellcasters using armor in the game, and probably it will be possible. But I think I'll do something where there is a penalty if you use armor that you're not proficient with, and the game advancement in the game is sort of, it's level based, but you get character points and you buy feats, and the whole idea is that if you're a mage and you want to buy the feat that will allow you to wear plate mail, then go ahead. It will cost you the character points from maybe advancing 3 or 4 levels to do so. But if you want to do that, that's fine. And I'm a big believer in letting people express themselves through role-playing games, and I'm not really here to put hurdles in front of people. It's more interesting to give them tools and see what they build with it, I think.
Yeah, I think you're on the right track in the case of not necessarily limiting their ability to do it, but making some incentive for them not to necessarily.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
A lot of what you see is you'll see Dark Souls, good example, since I've been playing that a lot lately. There are armor types that are like less actual shielding you from defense, but they actually boost your ability to use magic. So maybe you're incentivized to use that instead of, just going for whatever's the most defensive to you, like that kind of thing. Or that's, in my opinion, the way to go about it. But you're the game designer. I'm not here to tell you what to do. I like your explanation. I think that's a good way to handle it. Give the freedom. Freedom is important in an RPG or for me, any game.
Yeah, it's a huge part of an RPG, I think. I really think it is. And I usually try to think that I try not to design in negative spaces, where I try not to sort of do things that imposes limitations on the players. I instead try to offer the players things that give them bonuses instead, so that whenever you do something, you don't really, it's not really about avoiding penalties. It's about sort of getting bonuses. I think that's a lot more rewarding to players, because I think as game designers, not necessarily game designers, but especially programmers, when we're making role-playing games, we're often we're implementing our dream game in a sense, and then there's a lot of logical things that should go into that, but it's not really, like, for instance, mages can't wear armor. I don't think anyone would disagree with that, but just because you can't put it in the game, there's not really a reason to do it. And there's a lot of things like that where it's just so easy to put a lot of those things in, because it sort of it helps shape the world the way you see it in your head. But that doesn't necessarily make for a good experience with the end user, with you who's playing the game. I think that you're the same thing is with difficulty, for instance. I'm going to have very customizable difficulty in the game, and anything that's sort of, for instance, you'll be able to toggle on and off encumbrance. If you don't want to deal with encumbrance, toggle it off. If you don't want to deal with trash mob random encounters, you can turn it off. And a lot of game designers think that, no, but that's not the way I intended to play the game. But how you intended people to play the game is secondary to how people want to play your game. If someone wants to turn off random encounters and encumbrance, let them do so. It's completely fine. I just want people to have a good experience playing the game. And so I think that's, in general, it's sort of it's a big overarching theme for me when I'm making this game.
As someone who has spent a lot of time talking to game designers, I think that is exactly the right way to think about it.
It's good to hear.
You do see a lot of people who really want to make the game play experience that they personally want to play.
Yeah, exactly.
And I admire that. Like, I think there's some part of that that's good. Like, you should have a little bit of that, or perhaps 50% of it. But you can't forget the fact that you're trying to sell the game like
Yeah, exactly.
to other people who aren't exactly like you. And it's very difficult. Like it could be something as simple as like, well, hey, why is there no jump in this game? Well, the game that I really liked when I was a kid didn't have jumping in it, and I don't want this game to have jumping.
Yeah,
in it.
exactly.
But what if it would be? Why don't you just not push the jump key and let other people do whatever the hell they want?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but and also the nice thing about designing role playing games is that there's a lot of knobs you can very easily tweak on and off. That doesn't make the game unplayable, but it might make it a lot easier or more enjoyable to some people. And so I would say if you're designing a role-playing game and you don't have customizable difficulty in the game, then you're doing something wrong. Because there is really, I mean, in any RPG code, it's in the code base for any RPG. If the code isn't locked down and you can still change it, it's usually very, very simple to do things like tweak these variables, like we talked about with random encounters or anything that sort of, some people love it, some people hate it, and I think that's really a big selling point. And and the other side of the coin is that we will also have it will also be possible to sort of play the game, for instance, on Iron Man mode, having only one save and the game resetting if you die and things like that, because some people really love that as well. And then there's Steve achievements to give people if they do it one way or the other. People make videos on YouTube of them, playing the game on super hard mode or speed running the game. Because it's all about, who am I to say what kind of experience people are going to have playing the game? People get to decide for themselves what experience they want, and that's the important part, I think.
You've got a good balance because, as I said earlier, I mean, the story seems like very straightforward. Like you are in fact telling the story. You're dictating how the story is laid out in terms of where your main character is going, but you do have choices in like, who do I take with me or how will I level up my characters? You've got a very good mix of freedom and like actual, like, I wouldn't say linearity necessarily, but like guidance. And
yeah.
It's a hard balance to make. So I wanted to move on a little bit and talk about the the system with the marketing and selling your things and buying things. And one of the things that I noticed right up front was that, so in the camp, you have a market that you can go to, and she will sell you a bunch of armor and swords and buy things from you and everything. But one of the things that really stood out to me immediately was that she has an item which is her pile of gold.
Yeah, and you can buy the gold. I know.
And you can buy the gold.
Yeah.
So she wants one gold piece.
Per gold piece. Yeah, exactly. That sounds like a good deal. Now, I think, this is one of those systems where there's a lot of systems in the game currently, in the beta, that are they're not placeholders in the sense that I'm not going to replace the systems, but they're not properly bounded yet. If that makes sense. So, for instance, also, like the vendor in the camp, there is no reason why she should have a full inventory of plate mail. But it's just because I haven't tweaked those knobs yet. The same goes for, there is a pretty complex faction system in the game, but it's not really online in the game right now. So, like when you complete quests in the camp, you'll get better prices with the merchant, with the merchant and so forth. But those are kind of, we have to put those systems online incrementally, or else it becomes very overwhelming to debug. And also, I'm the only person coding the game, so there's even though there's a lot of rough edges like this, the infrastructure underlying it and the architecture underlying all of it is pretty solid. It just needs some refinement. And so right now you can buy the merchant's gold.
Yeah, I originally thought that was like an Easter egg. I'm like, wait, because it doesn't say you'll get one piece of gold in return. It says she wants one gold piece for a pile of gold. And I was like, yeah, okay, let's see what happens.
Yeah. No, it's not that bad, but but yeah, you can buy the gold. And well, I guess if you want to trade one gold piece for another, that's completely fine. So maybe it's just another layer of realism in the game. I don't know.
Yeah. Another thing that actually, I guess it got lost in translation somewhere, but there's the combat system, right? So you every time you enter combat, you give the option, like if you would, want to just have the combat kind of play out based on your character's stats and, the best moves and everything. It says push the return key, but I'm an American and I don't have a return key. I have an enter key. And I actually had to ask my friend, what is this? Like,
what's the return key?
Where's the return key on my keyboard?
Oh, really? Yeah. Because in the like the literal key codes that are built into the programming language I use, there's an enter key and there's a return key, and the enter key is under your numpad on the far right of the keyboard, and the enter key is the one that So, but I agree.
Point to the numpad on this.
It's that, isn't it?
It's not there.
Oh, really?
Exactly. It's a 10 keyless keyboard. I play first-person shooters, man. I don't have time for no fucking numpad taking up my desk space when I'm trying to swing my mouse around like an idiot.
Goddamn numpad. Yeah, but you figured it out. Yeah. You figured it out. It was a learning experience for you.
Yeah, it's all good.
Yeah.
But that was just like, what am I supposed to do here? Like, return key. So I really got involved in the combat. I didn't try that until the very end when I figured out what it was supposed to do.
Yeah.
And I like the combat system. It's, if I'm not mistaken, I watched some videos of people doing I guess it was like a let's play of an earlier build, like an alpha build.
Yeah.
And you actually had like a grid-based combat system that you seem to have since sort of, I mean, it's still a grid, but I guess made less obvious, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. It depends which version you saw, but the combat system has gone through the biggest changes in the game. It used to be not even grid-based. It was completely static, like in a JRPG. Like your characters would just face off on the sides. There was really no positioning in the game. It was just a question of were you in the first rank or the second rank. And if you were in the first rank, you could attack with melee. And then we sort of made a transition to a grid-based system, but where the game would sort of shift from the world map to a dedicated combat map that you would resolve the combat on.
That's what I saw. It was
exactly.
Yeah.
And then we sort of took the step completely, and now combat plays out on the exact map you're exploring. So, which is obviously the best solution. So I should have gone with it from the start. But there were some design. There were some historical reasons as well why we sort of started the way we did, and it had to do with sort of the pedigree of the game and which kind of games we were emulating to begin with. But there are some things that it looks good on paper, and especially when you see it through the lens of being nostalgic. But I think it's definitely better the way it is now. It's so much closer to it's a happy marriage of sort of being turn-based and some, even though it's it's turn-based, you can sort of lean back and think. It's very tactical, but there is some graphical components to it. And one of the things that was a big impetus for the change for me is that if people were watching you play this game on YouTube, would they be able to sort of read from seeing your screen what was going on? And that wasn't as apparent in the earlier versions of the combat system. And that's sort of one of the big reasons why we changed it the way we did. It's a lot more interesting for other people to watch other people play. And that's a huge thing today, even for a tiny little strange game like Skald. Seeing Let's Plays of the game is huge. And for me as an indie dev, I mean, if I sell 1,000 copies or 2,000 copies, that's a huge difference. And the only thing that, and that's the difference that can be made by one YouTuber picking up the game and playing it for 15 minutes, so to speak. So making it more readable has been a big deal the last 6 months, and I'm super happy with how far we've gotten, considering how primitive the graphics are, relatively speaking.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's you got to make it look sexy, or else people kind of, in this day and age, especially, people have options, right? So they're going to look around and if it doesn't catch their eye immediately, whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that in any RPG, right, unless you're just going to go with straightforward, actual, real-time combat, it's always going to be the hardest thing to decide on, because we're always kind of in this flux of because when you make the decision to have turn-based combat, you cut off a lot of people immediately, right? Like there's people who want that and love that and are used to it, and then there are so many different ways to do it, as we've already just gone through here. And then there are people who are just like, no, I want real-time combat, period. And you've got like a really nice little mix where it's, even though it is turn-based, it kind of still feels like, I can still move around. I can still be involved in the action itself.
Yeah.
One of the games that actually really got turn-based combat, like grid-style combat right, was South Park, The Stick of Truth. I'm not sure if you ever saw that game, but they nailed it.
Yeah.
It was so much fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I think that was also one of the things that, coming back to the idea of having options in the game and having a lot of knobs to tune for the players as well. You can turn the game down to narrative mode in difficulty, and then whenever you enter combat, just press enter or return, and then just have the combat play out basically as a real-time game. You just lean back, and then the players will go to town on their opponents, and that's also something we will probably improve more in the game. Is sort of the AI of the auto resolve is currently pretty primitive, but there is no limit to how refined we can make it. So that even auto resolving the game should be a completely valid way of playing it. We could auto resolve it in the sense that there was no combat. You would just get a message saying you won this combat or you lost, and this is how it went. But I didn't really want that. I think it's a very good happy medium to sort of have the game take on almost this real-time like quality, and then you can stop it at any time. You can issue some orders, do some healing spells, and then just turn the auto resolve on again and see the game play out. I think that's it's really satisfying. So I'm very happy with that function in the game.
Yeah, the auto resolve mechanic itself actually brought me back to when I played Knights of the Old Republic, which had that implemented. In fact, I would say that's about the closest comparison between your game and any other combat system I've seen. I don't know if that had anything to do with your planning, but you have the option to okay, go through by each character. What is, what's my strength here? What's the optimal thing I should do? Or you can make the decision to move out of the way and just let shit happen, defend all this.
Yeah.
Almost exactly how it plays out in Knights of the Old Republic.
That was 100% not intentional, but now that you say it, it's actually a pretty good comparison that I didn't think about before you mentioned it. But it's actually you're spot on. It's actually a pretty good comparison.
Yeah, I mean, are there any more like recent RPGs that kind of, even if they are indie or whatever, that you kind of leaned on or looked at and said this is sort of thing I'd like to go for?
I think in terms of the combat system in particular, there's a lot of D&D 3.5 edition in it. So especially sort of the focus on positioning in the game and the way that works. There's a lot of the tabletop D&D 3.5 edition in the game. And I think people who played D&D 3.5 will definitely recognize a lot of the sort of the terminology, and it will come very easily to them. And beyond that, there's honestly not a lot of modern games. Actually, the Pillars of Eternity games as well. They did some pretty interesting things in their combat system, and some of the features I haven't really implemented yet. That have to do, for instance, with the way you regenerate hit points after combat. It's not in the game right now. Right now, we have a typical, like in D&D, that your hit points go down, and then you can cast healing spells, or you can rest to get them back up. But the way they did hit points in the Pillar of Eternity games is a very interesting way of doing it. Which I don't know if you're familiar with it. Did you play Pillars of Eternity?
I've not played it. I have one friend who plays it religiously. Every 3 months when they put out the next chapter or whatever, he goes away for he's like, I'll see you guys under 2 or 3 weeks. And
yeah. Well, what they do with hit points is that whenever you're in combat, you lose hit points in two different ways. One is that you lose them very superficially, and these hit points will recover instantly whenever combat is over. And then when you take real wounds, it lowers the maximum of what your hit points can be. So you may start the combat with 30 hit points, and then you lose maybe 25 of them, but they might pop right back up. But then if someone critical hits you, you might lose 10 of your maximum hit points. So when you regenerate after combat, it only goes up to 20. And the difference is that sort of this like the major critical damage, it can't be healed by your healer. It can only be healed by resting. And this means that you won't have to keep using your cleric's spells to cast healing spells after every combat. You can use it in combat to sort of boost the light damage and to sort of avoid passing out from that. But after combat is over, you will automatically heal everything you can possibly heal without resting, which means that you don't have to do all of sort of this healing spell logistics. That's a big part of many role-playing games. So that's probably the way I'm going to do it as well, to avoid people having to sort of spend 15 minutes after every combat healing everyone in the party up. You will instantly get back what you can get back, and the rest you have to set up camp and rest to recover properly. So there's a lot of innovations like that in Pillars of Eternity games that I think were really good. So I'm stealing when I can from them.
I think that pretty much covers like the combat system, because I think it'll, from what I'm understanding from you, you'll continue to innovate on it as we go.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah. One of the others, we're kind of closing on your time frame you gave me. So I do want to kind of dive into what, if anything, is there an influence of the actual skaldic poetry on the story of the game at all, or the world that the game takes place in?
No, because there isn't really on the story of the game.
Okay.
Not at all, actually. The story is actually, I would say, more than anything, inspired by more pulpy noir, and also actually, for instance, the first season of True Detective is a pretty big influence on a lot of the writing in the game. So I chose to sort of not let myself be constrained too much by the Skald part of the name, and that's also because I very easily. One of the problems you have when you make games is that the popular culture now is so big and so rich that you can hardly turn around without drawing comparisons from other games. And I very early started sort of having people worried that the game was going to be too similar to Skyrim, for instance. Okay, it's an empire, and then there are some Nordic people, and there's some conflict. Oh, it's Skyrim. And so I actually took sort of, I pulled out everything that looked like Norse mythology or history and culture from the game, basically, because I want Skald to be its own thing, definitely. So no, I would say that there isn't really a lot of it in it. I'm sorry if that disappoints you a bit, but
it doesn't. It's totally fine, because there's, well, I should say there's two sides to it, to my feeling on that. One is that I just finished reading Saga of the Volsungs today, and I was like, oh fuck, like that'd be really cool, like to play this game, and I really liked that whole book, and it's a huge part of like European culture and everything. But the other side of it is that not just RPGs, but high fantasy as a genre all stems from Tolkien, essentially.
Exactly.
Like everything gets tied back to that. And he was hugely influenced by the Finns and the Nordic mythology and the ring cycle and everything in Wagner too. But it's all based on that. And it's kind of it kind of gets old, It's like how many games are we going to do that are just more Lord of the Rings over and over and over again? That's what you get in D&D. That's what you get in anything that's not cyberpunk.
Yeah, exactly. And for my part, it's
story.
Yeah, and it would be super easy to just delve into the trope space of sort of the whole fantasy zeitgeist as it is today. But I think that's not what the people who backed Skald backed the game to see, and it's not the kind of story I want to tell. I really want to tell a different story, and it would be more difficult to tell the kinds of stories that I told if I went too deep on generic fantasy tropes. And sadly, the whole Norse mythology thing, as much as I love it, it's also become part of this very, very popularized fantasy tropes due to series like the Vikings and also the game Skyrim. So it's difficult to do anything involving anything that looks like Norse mythology without instantly sort of drawing those comparisons and also diluting a little bit of what you're what makes Skald. And I think there's a lot of subtle things in the game that might be difficult to put your finger on, but sort of it's difficult to, as in the sense that I am an artist, there's something about calling your own work postmodern, but there is a streak of postmodernism in Skald. It's sort of self-referential in a way, and it sort of tries to eschew some of the tropes that's so common in fantasy literature. And so I don't know, it's a bit long-winded answer, but I think it would be difficult to do what I want to do if I went too deep on very well-established pop cultural tropes, if that makes sense.
I agree. And it's actually, to me, it's kind of sad because I actually kind of hate the fact that I like the TV series Vikings to an extent. I don't like the fact that they wear rubber shoes. Like, that's not fucking historically accurate at all, but like, we'll let that slide. And I never liked Skyrim, but I get it. Like, it's Tolkien style fantasy and everything. I'm surprised you didn't bring up Assassin's Creed, because that's what everybody's fucking in their mother is talking about to me right now.
I don't even touch that shit.
Yeah, me neither. I've never played an Assassin's Creed game. Very proudly have never touched an Assassin's Creed game. But they're like, Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Rune 2 was pretty good. I enjoyed a bit of that. But it kind of sucks that like Viking, what they call Viking stuff is just so popular that it's not even cool anymore to do it, which sucks.
No, it's
because
true.
It makes for a great story.
I think,
and then
because the thought is, of course, the thought crossed me to sort of delve deep in on the Viking thing and sort of do the Viking thing instead. But the thing that also I realized very quickly was that if I did it, the only way I would do it was to sort of, I would have to make a Viking game that was a lot more nuanced than most other Viking games are, that sort of focused on a lot of these aspects of early medieval Northern European culture that are very under-communicated, but are perhaps more interesting than sort of this bare-chested berserkers with big axes and horned helmets. I
like that The Witcher literally like turned them into bears. Like, let's just go all in on it.
Yeah, exactly. And so that was sort of I couldn't have done it like a little bit. I would have to do it. I would have to sort of dig deep if I was going to do it. So I think it's better to more or less cut it out of the game completely then.
Yeah. No, I mean, you're telling your own story here. Like, I knew from the moment that I went into the maze and interacted with, the memories of, is her name, what's her name again? I'm sorry.
Embla.
I keep forgetting everybody's names.
Yeah, Embla. Embla is her name.
Embla. I was going to say like Emily, but you're right. Embla. Of course you're right. You made it. I knew from the moment that thing happened, I was like, okay, we're going on a totally different journey than I thought. This is some like,
yeah, exactly.
It's going to get psychedelic. We got colors in the water. Everything's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a weird topic. Like, because if you really wanted to make like a true honest to goodness, like Viking kind of game, or like, I shouldn't even say that, like Old Norse, like traditional story, like how everything is quote unquote meant to be. I mean, you'd have to start basically turning My Farog into a video game, and I wouldn't want that task. Like,
no,
because are you familiar with My Farog?
No.
Oh, okay. So I'm going to say his name once. It's a dirty name in a lot of circles, but Vargnus. He's
I know. Oh yeah. Of course. Vargnus. Yeah. He's renowned Norwegian Satanist and black metal artist, now turned role-playing tabletop RPG author.
People have their opinions on Varg. I mean, he went to jail there for a long time for killing the other Euronymous.
Yeah.
And I mean, but I'll say this about him: interesting guy. At the very least, very, very interesting character. But he did make my Farog, and I actually bought it for a friend of mine who was really into tabletop games because I was like, oh, I like this kind of shit. Let's just see what's in there.
Yeah.
And he really, if there's nothing else to be said about the guy, he's very deeply into like preserving the culture, and that's what that game is about to him.
Yeah.
And anyway, point being, like that's about the most like Norwegianist game I've ever seen in my life. It's just all about like, you know, it goes into like every little detail of the world, like the May, what is it called? The May festival.
Yeah.
Where you pick a May King and a May Queen and all, like it's very like to the point where in the book it describes how like, well, there's no toilet paper, so you have to wipe your ass with moss, which you must collect along the way. And I don't know that anybody wants to play a game like that. I think you're on the right track, man. Just tell your fantasy story, make it original, let it come from your soul, your mind, and it's already beautiful. Like just the little vertical slice that I've played so far is absolutely beautiful. That's
fantastic to hear.
And we're just past the hour mark now, so I will give you the opportunity to say, let's say in closing here, I assume when we release this, you will have the press release and such pretty much out there, so people will be seeing the game a lot more. What can folks do to help you and support you right now?
So when we're talking right now, I'm currently setting up the Steam page, and we've also just recently applied to get the game onto to GOG.com. And hopefully by the time this podcast goes up, we will have both landing pages ready. So what I recommend people do is go to the devlog, which is skaldrpg.com, and then just do whatever it says on the front side. It will probably point you directly to the Steam and GOG pages. Go there, wishlist the game. That's the biggest thing you can do. And if you want to sort of become part of the Skald community, it's a really, really, really awesome community. We have a fantastic Discord. A lot of people who really passionately love RPGs, especially the kind of games like Skald. And sort of making Skald is a very collaborative effort. So if this sounds like your game, and if this is something you would be interested in sort of contributing to, either by just hanging out in the community or offering feedback, doing playtesting, or even maybe helping out with some editing or something like that, this is definitely the game for you. So check out skaldrpg.com, and we'll see where the game is when this podcast goes live.
Yeah, it's been really excellent just getting to spend some time with you and getting to know you a bit, and drinking on this vodka. I needed an excuse because this is my good vodka. I bought this so like when friends come over, I could break it out and be like, this shit came all the way from Iceland. It's like special. Like, but I figured that if there was ever an occasion, it would be today. Yeah. So
this was really nice. We should totally get a beer sometime. This was, I think we could have done this for hours if we were in the same time zone.
Usually, like honestly, I will go on for 3 hours. I do that with guests all the time. But I know you've got a limited time frame, so I'll say this: come back on anytime you want at all, even if it's just a chat, and we can just go on forever and talk about all the nuanced subjects you want. And I think that it's a good thing. I say this a lot, but I don't think that people necessarily, and you mentioned this before we started recording, tune in just to hear about the game. They want to get to know you. And I think that when people have a personal connection with anything, you know, like if you were a craftsman, if you're a blacksmith, and you're making knives, people would want to buy your knife because they know you made it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So my hope is that they get to know you and they want to support you because they find a personal connection with you. And so with that, anytime you want, come back. I would love to have you back, especially when you're, getting into early access, when there's releases coming up, anything like that. Like any occasion you can think of to come back and chat with me, doors open.
Let's do it.
All right.
Thank you so much for having me on, man. This has been real good.
All right. big thanks to Al for coming on the show, talking all about this absolutely fantastic game. If you would like to support them, I recommend you do exactly what he just said and go over there to wishlist it on GOG and Steam. Thank you also to our wonderful supporters. Gotta say all their names. So Paul, Moose, Dots, Zach, Alexander, Brad, Red Eyes, Anthony, Robert, Jack, Brandy, Fred, Lord Revan, Tones, Agrak Simon, and Morpher, the whole Flam Fam, Moleke, Mike, and Zan. I love you guys. If you would like to be mentioned alongside wonderful people like them, you can head over to inthekeep.com/support and look at the many different ways that you can help out. And as always, it's not all just about money, although that is helpful. The most important thing you can do is share. Share the show. Till next time, stay in the keep.